Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan podcast. I am here in Bangalore, India, for the Rise for Aging conference put on by Longevity India. And I'm joined today by Dr. Marcus Ranney and Dr. Brian Kennedy. Marcus is a leading longevity physician in India, and Brian is, I don't know, a mediocre middle-aged scientist in the longevity field. No, Brian obviously is one of my good friends and one of the most prolific and impactful scientists in the field. So I feel very fortunate to be able to sit down with the two of you. And maybe we can just start by sort of reflecting on this conference. I mean, I think for me, this is my first time to India. I didn't really know what to expect, and I have been really, really impressed with, first of all, how large the longevity community is here, how rich the science is, and also the innovation happening in industry here. So I just come away from this meeting really inspired, and I think India definitely has an opportunity to be a real leader in the field.
Yeah. Well, firstly, thanks for having me on. The fact that I can be sandwiched between two luminaries, and there are many voices which are, let's say, not as credible globally, but the fact that both of you come to India, you invested so much time here, and we're of course recording this. It's a great privilege for you guys to be here and for the opportunity. Look, I'm super kicked by what we've just experienced over the last few days, Matt. When I started this 6-7 years ago, people were still pronouncing it as longevity. Now, thankfully, the word at least is better pronounced. And to see so many people from all the sectors, right? We had government, we had private industry, we had clinicians, physicians, we had scientists, we had entrepreneurs, techies, engineers. So it's a real multi-stakeholder energy and effort which is coming together to build. I think it's so important for us to do that because we cannot, when I say we, I mean India, we cannot just adopt the practices of the West. If we think we were going to build a healthcare system which sort of replicated what's happening in other parts of the world, we won't be able to address the challenge of the population, the disease profile, the demographic, et cetera, et cetera. So I see this as an opportunity to disrupt and to build something which can address the most relevant healthcare needs for the 21st century for our population.
Yeah, I mean, the meeting is fascinating. I think there's a lot of great science here. It's very diverse, a lot of AI-driven stuff that I think is interesting, and that kind of reflects the commitment of this country to AI, I think. And a lot of unique challenges. You know, here's one I didn't even think about, right? Because I go around and tell people that people ask me what's a healthy diet, and I often say something close to vegetarian is a healthy diet, maybe low red meat, low dairy, maybe the dairy here is not, but low red meat and lots of vegetables. Yeah. And this is a culture that, is culturally vegetarian. A huge percentage of this population is vegetarian. And yet the vegetarian diet here doesn't align well with what we would call healthy vegetarian. So this is a challenge, I think, that is unique to India. How do we take a culture and keep it vegetarian if you want, and refine it in ways that lead to healthier.
And that's reflected in the obesity and diabetes rates in India. I mean, you probably know the statistics, but my impression is that it's pretty high here. And again, I think most Americans would think a society that's largely vegetarian is probably going to be healthy, but this just goes to show that vegetarian doesn't necessarily mean healthy from a metabolic perspective.
Yeah, I think we've got 100 million diabetics, about 150 plus million pre-diabetic insulin resistant.
Yeah.
We've got about 30% of the population with fatty liver disease. So these are big numbers.
Yeah.
I think the big difference, however, Matt, would be one is our median age is significantly younger, and secondly, our population base is 4 or 5 times as large.
Right.
So when you put those two multiplication factors in, that's sort of a significant effort for us to overcome.
But also, I mean, I think a huge opportunity to take, the evolving science in the longevity space and have a big impact on society, right? I mean, there's certainly opportunity in the United States as well, but I think here, and again, maybe this is something that came up a couple times in conversations, the healthcare system is very different, and there are some maybe unique opportunities to have an impact as the healthcare system here is undergoing changes at the ground level that are actually harder to implement. I think, Brian, you said it at one point during one of the talks that one of the real challenges in the United States is to create incentives for the people who pay for healthcare to get them to adopt the incentives.
Yeah.
There might be unique opportunities in India to do that, where you can sort of bypass some of those structural features that make it hard to change anything in the United States.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is replicate the American healthcare system.
Yeah.
Can you describe for us, like, what is the healthcare system in
So,
India?
I mean, largely it's divided into private and public. Public, where it was 5-6 years ago versus where it is today, is different. It's different because under the current government, the Modi government, they institutionalized a health for all practice, which is anyone below a particular economic sort of threshold. They have universal, we just call it universal healthcare, which is provided by either the public sector or some of the private sector as well. So that's been a major change over the last few years, just to bring or elevate the baseline level of health across the country. Remembering that, I mean, a lot of viewers will just think of India as the new big cities, but 70% of India is still living in the hundreds of thousands of villages that we have in rural India. So they don't have access to all the modern day infrastructure that we have, right? So that's one. Private healthcare has been on a very rapid growth over the last 10-15 years. A lot of private equity, institutional capital coming in, building the brick and mortar aspects of that. And now, I think, as you were saying, Brian, sort of this tech layer, which is sort of building at the background. I think that's the opportunity right now, which is India did it really well with what's called the Aadhaar system, the universal identification number, the UIN, similar to sort of your social security number in the US. So the fact that 98% of our 1.5 billion people now have a digital identity, which then now integrates with the banking system. So they can open a bank account, they can open a mobile phone account. So now India is looking at what does the health stack look like, where through that same digital architecture, we can have a common platform for health records, for diagnostics, for care delivery, etc., which is available on your phone. And that helps us leapfrog a lot of the sort of the traditional requirements.
And if you can build in, proactive, preventative, longevity medicine into that platform, right? There's a real opportunity there. I mean, again, this is sort of a nice segue. So, I mean, you have your own longevity practice, longevity program in India. Maybe you can tell us a bit about that and some of your experiences, and then we can sort of compare notes and.
Yeah. So it's called Human Edge. I mean, I came at this, Matt, from the high performance side of things. Then got into functional medicine and really wanted to take a more scientific approach to lifestyle. So Human Edge is a vehicle to sort of deliver that for individuals. It's more centered around aging well and the prevention and proaction. So many similar languages that we use together to sort of address those challenges. What we're seeing and what we are sort of trying to think now towards is, apart from the clinical experience of a protocol where there's a measurement, there's an engagement, there's a tracking, is how do we then layer the technology behind it? Way far behind artificial intelligence. I think that's probably an overused word, but even beginning with the ground of building a rules-based engine, which through man-in-the-middling can then become a machine learning layer to try and democratize this for more and more people. So that's sort of our approach. So high-end human-delivered experiences and protocols supported by technology, which is becoming smarter and more intelligent, that we can scale over a period of time. So that's sort of how we're sort of thinking through things.
And you, Brian, you interact with a lot of longevity clinics. I mean, I think, again, one of the themes that came out of this conference was the sort of continued and rapid development and implementation, integration of AI tools into longevity medicine. Are there any trends that you've been picking up on, or maybe some things that you worry about in that context?
Well, I still think that a lot of these clinics are using like 19th century statistics to try to show that things work, like a paired t-test. I mean, come on, when you get collecting a lot of data and you have hundreds of individuals and you're following them up, you can model that data. You don't have to just compare one thing to one thing. And I still think clinics need help with that. It sounds, you're one of the ones that I think is thinking, progressively about that and trying to already accomplish that. But one of the things we try to do when we talk to clinics is help them just make meaning out of your data. You're trying things, I think that you know, there's many components to a clinic. Like one of them is doing the medicine people should have gotten somewhere else,
Right.
measuring the risk factors
Right.
for disease and treating that, and that's one thing. But when you get to the geroprotective space, it's basically research. You know, you're bringing people in, they're agreeing to sort of be at the leading edge, and they're doing things that you suggest that you think are likely to work. But in most cases, aside from lifestyle, most cases they're not validated yet. So let's figure out how to collect that data and figure out who's responding. We may not be able to have placebo controls, but at least we can baseline people, know a lot about them, and see who responds to what. And so we're trying to help clinics do that.
Are there any large-scale efforts to capture data across clinics like that?
There are some organizations that have been started with the goal of doing that, but I think it's challenging to do because clinics are hesitant to just provide that information. And one of the reasons we do it through the private sector is that we can work better with the clinic. If I have a graduate student working on this data, I need to publish it, you know. And so if we have a company working on it, we can say, all right, this is working, this is not working, this is where maybe you should go here, you know. And I think that ultimately we do want to aggregate all that data, but that's a challenge.
Yeah. What do you think are the ways to tell whether something's working or not? Because that's another challenge, right? So I mean, I think the question is, right, everybody agrees lifestyle, we should focus there, do the things that we know work, but then beyond that, rapamycin, metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors, stem cells, crazy gene therapies, right? All of that are potential interventions. There's a long laundry list. So the question is, how do you determine whether those things are working either at the population level or for individuals? And that's where you're talking about the statistics and trying to measure that. But what are you measuring to tell whether it's working or not, I think is also part of the challenge here.
I think that's a different question in different places. In stem cell clinics, they're often bringing people in with different kinds of conditions. They're injecting stem cells in the joint or the IV. There's a lot of variables in that equation. And in that case, what I'm saying is at least let's try to set a few things we can measure in everybody and how they respond. You know, maybe they're biologic aging markers, maybe they're like core clinical things that we all agree on that are important for aging, but let's try to collect at least some data we can look at across the population. For a longevity clinic, I think it's easier in the sense that, you know, you don't have, it's not all about stem cells going here and there. You know, you're looking at different interventions, but everybody's coming in. Most people are not coming in to be treated for some condition. They're coming in to try to stay healthy or optimize their performance. And so you can baseline that a little bit better, but it's a challenge.
I mean, I would almost say maybe it's harder because I think if you're using an intervention to fix pain in a specific part of the body, it's pretty easy to measure whether that worked or not. Now, it could be placebo effect and all that, but in the longevity space, it's less, I think it's actually less clear what the right markers are to use.
Maybe. I think one of the problems with stem cell research too is it's all being done in regulatory regions that are very gray. And so when I got up at a stem cell conference recently and I said, if anybody else shows me one picture of a person before stem cells and after stem cells, and then says they have data on 300 people, and that doesn't show me a curve or a graph or something, I'm going to lose my mind. And afterwards, one of the practitioners came up to me and said, look, if we aggregate that data and make it public, that brings attention to the regulatory boards and they may stop us from doing what we're doing. So there's challenges still in the stem cell field that are, you know, we have to be practical. I think most of these clinics believe they're helping people. And I think in some contexts, I believe they are too, but they have to navigate in this gray area. If we could bring more transparency to these things, that would be so helpful.
Are there non-human models where we've seen specific interventions using stem cells for specific health outcomes with proven results?
Yes.
There are?
Yes. Okay. But for aging, I think that's an open question.
I would agree. I think that the other challenge with stem cells is, you know, how do you know who to trust? Which clinics, what are the sources of the stem cells? And again, that comes back to the same problem, the lack of regulation in certain places So these clinics naturally gravitate towards those regions, and then maybe the over-regulation in other places. And what we really need is a balance where people can do this, do it well with manufacturing quality control standards and clinical quality control standards and requirements to actually collect the data so that we can figure out what works.
And let me say something else about, we don't want to get this all the way off on stem cells, but I've been paying a lot of attention to this recently. Let me say something else about this, that it's not easy to produce these things. And if you have to produce them in a GMP grade facility, which hopefully people are doing, but
a lot aren't.
If you have to produce these in a GMP grade facility, there's so much standardization that goes into it. Like, the people running the facility, they want to say, you split the cells every 3 days, but the cells are finicky. If you split them every 3 days, you might dilute them too much, and you don't. So it's very hard to adapt a cell protocol into a GMP grade context. And even with exosomes, which are the other area that people are focused on a lot, the batch-to-batch effects are still huge. So the production for widespread use is still problematic. And again, I think there's promise to exosome therapy.
But in the absence of regulation, there's no quality controls on the production. So it's an unknown. Do you use stem cells or exosomes in your
so
practice
actually,
at all?
Interestingly, I was in the Middle East last week and met with a clinic there, which is taking fat harvesting from adipose tissue and then creating your own line of stem cells. They're doing interarticular joints and IV infusions as well. At the conference, I had someone come up to me who is manufacturing it in India using placental sources. So it's not your own. It's and again, my first question to him was, how are you guaranteeing the safety of what is actually going into that individual? Which placenta, under what conditions, where is it being stored, etc. So no, we're not sort of actively using that. And same for peptides, actually.
No peptides either.
Yeah, it's not.
Those two cases are a good thing to compare and contrast because, I think generally the safety data is probably there, although I can't point to it, but it's been done so widely and you don't hear too many problems. One problem with adipose is you need to get the lipids out of the prep, so there needs to be a good, you don't want to inject a bolus of lipids into people when you're doing IV, and so that can cause problems. But I think that if it's done well, it's generally safe. But then you can do autologous from adipose tissue. If you're doing it from aging, those cells are the same age you are. So you're putting more stem cells in at the same age. If you do it from umbilical cord, and I've had that a couple times just to try it, I'm still here. If you do it from umbilical cord, it's all allogenic. It's not your cells.
And how do you know where to go that you trusted, or were you willing to take? You're kind of a risk taker.
He is.
I knew the lab that was doing it.
Okay.
And then if you're but then if it's allogenic, it's not your cells. Now, if it's MSCs, they're partially protected from your immune system. So they're immunoprivileged. So they will last some time in your body, even if they're not your cells, but probably not as long as your autologous cells do. But those cells are from, a baby or an umbilical cord. So, they may be younger and providing more benefits. We don't know how to compare these different things right now, which are better, which are safer. And so it's interesting.
So one of the ways I've started to try to think about, intervention. So there's, again, obviously a risk reward, right? So let's just take the risk part out. That's important. But I think just for thinking about it, I kind of think like for interventions, there are things that very likely work or definitely work and have big effects. There are things that very likely or definitely work that have small effects. There are things that might work, and if they do, they could have big effects. Might work. At best, they're going to be small effects, and then there are things that just don't work, right? So in those 5 categories, like where would you guys each put stem cells? And I know that there are different kinds of stem cells, as you just said.
For soft tissue repair,
let's just say general health and not for specific conditions, but for maintaining or improving health.
It's like for soft tissue repair, you're like 1 to 5, I'd put it at 4. I think
in terms of likelihood of working so you think it's likely to work and big effect?
At least medium effect. A lot of these cells hone to sites of inflammation and damage. They're anti-inflammatory. They may stimulate your adult stem cells in those tissues. They're widely used for that, and also for like autoimmune conditions maybe. For aging, I would put it at 2 to 3. I don't think we have the evidence.
But is that in terms of likelihood of working or effect size if it does work?
Maybe both. I think that you're getting a little bit more protracted anti-inflammatory effect from it.
And again, that's taking out the risk side, which we've sort of already covered.
It's
but
not zero, the risk. But,
sure, yeah,
you
absolutely.
can minimize it.
It depends
Just to be clear, so if someone comes with requiring an intra-articular joint injection, you're saying even the IV infusion of stem cells will be able to hone in.
Well, I think you target it to the joint if they have a particular problem. But for longevity, you would probably do it
across
broadly.
the board. Right. Okay. Interesting. I don't have enough personal experience to sort of answer that question.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, and we talked a little bit, just touched on peptides for a minute. I mean, that's another sort of therapeutic area. That means a lot. I mean, it's funny because people ask me, what do you think about peptides? And then they ask, what do you think about drugs, right? It's like, there are lots and lots of different kinds of peptides out there, but it is an area that lots of people are interested in and excited about. And so I would think like, the canonical like peptide therapeutic would GLP-1 agonist, right? So I'd put that personally in the definitely works big effect size bucket.
I'd put insulin above that, right? Insulin is
definitely works big effect size bucket. Yeah. But when we look at sort of the other ones, I mean, where do you? So you said you don't do it in your practice.
We don't have actually. Again, it's a sourcing issue in India. Whilst there's an interest, there are one or two companies that are, again at the conference, I had someone come to me pitch for peptides. But because we haven't had enough experience with it, and then obviously knowing where the source is coming from, it's one of those things where I'm still in the risk versus gain, and I'm still too wary on the risk side. Yeah.
And each peptide is going to have its own risk profile.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we need to put a lot more effort into these though, because at least on the research side, I think they show a tremendous amount of promise.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I feel like even in the United States, where there are lots and lots of docs prescribing these and lots of people using them, there's not a lot of good quality data on efficacy coming out because people aren't sharing data. It's also, I think there's still a little bit of a stigma associated with it, and a lot of the docs who have been prescribing peptides for a long time, I think haven't taken a particularly scientific approach to it. It's been more, this guy, I gave him this peptide and suddenly, he can run a marathon, or his back pain went away, or whatever. So we just don't have, I feel like we don't have real high quality data. But for the common ones, also, enough people have been using them. If they had a really high side effect profile, we'd probably know it. I think the sourcing thing that you pointed out is really important. And I mean, in the United States, with the FDA sort of being vague and irresponsible in my view, and how they're handling this. We're sort of left in this gray area where there are a few compounding pharmacies that have read the FDA guidance as though it's okay to continue manufacturing peptides, and then there are a bunch who have stopped, and so that's led to a proliferation of companies selling peptides for research purposes only, right? And you just don't. It kind of goes back to the stem cells. Like, who do you trust? Why would you trust these companies that are selling peptides for research purposes only? It's complicated. So let's see. Where would you put, so let's say, let me ask you this. What, if anything, would you put in the definitely works large effect size? So that's a lever we can pull in your clinical experience. What are the things you focus on that are the big movers?
I mean, are we adding lifestyle to that list?
I think you can put lifestyle in there, sure. I mean, those are the things I think of immediately where we know they work.
Exercise, up there, that would probably be number one.
And for exercise, what is your sort of general philosophy? What type of exercise? How specific do you try to get?
So, I mean, given India's overtly sedentary culture, I think we're one of the most sedentary countries on earth, at least as measured by those global Fitbit scores, etc., that they publish every year. So I think for us, the first thing is just getting people moving, irrespective of how they want to move, just get moving every single day. Now, if we were going really detailed and nuanced, preferences would be a minimum of 150 minutes in zone 2. Then ensuring there's at least 2.
That's a week.
Per week. Then at least 2, try for 3 strength training sessions in the week to give that muscle and bone stimulus.
And if you had to pick, somebody's like, I just can't do both, doc. What would you prioritize?
Muscle.
Okay.
Let me be devil's advocate a bit. I agree with exercise, so I'm not really devil's advocate here, but there's a lot of argument about whether exercise really affects aging. And I want to come back to this concept that I've been talking about a lot. That
I think you mean lifespan.
Yeah, I'm gonna get. So the point is that you have a person who has a potential lifespan, and then they have a behavioral system that they're eating too much, they're sedentary, they're shortening their lifespan. Maybe they're accelerating their aging, and then you exercise and you bring that back up, which is kind of longevity normalizing, I would say. Sure. If you look at maximum lifespan with exercise in animal models, there's not much evidence it goes up. You're really squaring the curve. So what you may be, and this is great if we can do it, I'm not being critical, but what we may be doing is pushing more people toward their potential, but not really slowing the process of aging.
Yeah, so I agree with you. That's what the animal data suggests, right? So caloric restriction increases both median and maximum lifespan, rapamycin the same. Exercise seems to square the curve. So median gets a little bit of an increase, but not maximum. You and I just came from the Gerophysics conference in Singapore. We won't get into the details too much, but...
You don't want to write some equations?
I would like that. I'm not sure everybody else would. But I think one of the things that came out of that conference, and let's just leave it conceptual for now, is that people might be fundamentally different than mice in this regard. And it might be that exercise really is hitting, in effect, a similar sort of aspect of aging as these other interventions in humans, right? That's squaring the curve, sort of. I'm speculating, but I think in humans we know exercise improves health span. Like I don't think anybody would debate that,
I would,
right?
Never encourage anyone to not exercise. I'm arguing at a more esoteric level.
From the biology of aging perspective, it's interesting. But I would also say, there's pretty clear connections between exercise and at least many of the hallmarks of aging. So it does impact the biology of aging. I think the question is it in the same way as some of these other interventions?
And how many of those hallmarks affect maximum lifespan too?
Yeah, that's a different conversation, probably a longer one. So exercise, of course.
So I think exercise is a big one. I put food. Nutrition is the second one.
And how do you characterize a healthy diet? Again, let's not get too granular, but at the macro level.
I very much agreed with you, which is how much, followed by what, and then the when. Now, again, speaking from the lens of India, the nuances there are significantly different compared to maybe other parts of the world. So the how much may not vary, but the what varies significantly.
You mean across
different
India,
parts? So the what? No, I mean comparing India versus maybe other parts of the world.
Oh,
right?
okay.
So total calorific.
But even inside
input.
India, it varies a lot, right? North, south.
Yeah, and again, which India are we talking about? But I'm just focused on sort of urban India for the time being, which is maybe total calorific value would be comparable, but certainly the macronutrient split is significantly different. I think you guys have experienced that whilst you're here, which is we are way too carb heavy and way too protein deficient. So readjusting that plan for individuals is really important for a variety of different things.
And do you get pushback against that?
No, actually, I think people are now becoming much more aware. I think the perverse or the converse has happened, which is now we're seeing this sudden surge of sort of venture capital money into protein supplementation and bars and powders, and people are actually replacing their meals with the sort of artificial augmentation agents.
What do you tell people about that?
So my stance is try and get it from real food. Right? That's my preference. I don't care whether it's coming from plant or animal, just get it from real food. The second is that if you do then need to augment, not replace, then let's look at some of the more credible brands. And there are some early studies in India which are done sort of by third parties, especially in the protein space, looking at heavy metal toxicity, actual amino acid breakup, etc. So we can be guided a little bit smarter, but still far too many brands have excessive calories, particularly sugars. In them. So that sort of protein piece is a
I actually think that's really important to just reinforce, right? If you are supplementing with a protein shake or a protein bar, to look at the label and make sure that they aren't adding sugar to it.
I know.
This is completely unnecessary.
By coincidence, last week I was like, I wanted to eat a protein bar. Again, I was trying to like get nutrition because I had a viral infection. And I started looking at the label. I couldn't believe how much sugar is in these things.
It's crazy what some of these manufacturers do. There's just no, I mean, I get it's for taste, so you can sell it, but from a health perspective, it's really almost criminal.
So I had a patient actually see me last month, and he's a type 2 insulin-resistant diabetic, 40 years old, very heavy, busy corporate executive. came specifically for lifestyle intervention. And he stuck to everything we asked him. His sleep improved, we measured it. His movement improved, DEXA scan replicated that, body composition. His blood's macro were changing. But interestingly, two things. His fasting insulin got worse. His A1C had gotten worse, and his trigs had elevated. So we were really scratching our heads, like, how has that happened, but everything else has moved in the right direction? And he says, look, doc, we're fully compliant. And I said, okay, just take me through your day. Like, let me really get into the weeds here. What's happening? So he described everything, And he said, hey, about 12:31, sometimes I can't have lunch, so I've opted for a protein bar. I was like, show me this protein bar. So he gets it, turn the packet over, 450 calories.
Yeah.
45 grams.
45 grams.
45 grams of sugar.
Wow.
Right? So that was one. And then at around 6, 7 p.m., after he did his evening workout, he was, instead of just having some water, he was adding in one of these sort of effervescent tablets. And again, there was added sugar in there. Yeah. So he was fully compliant, thinking I'm leading a healthy life and things were changing. Yeah. But actually the key markers were going in the wrong way.
And a protein bar, many people would consider, part of that healthy.
As a healthy snack.
Yeah, snack. It's just that if you eat the wrong protein bar, you sabotage yourself. So I think in general, looking at the labels is just something you have to do until you find brands that meet the standards that you're looking for in your diet. You have to, and then as much as possible, avoid foods where you have to look at the label. I think would be another.
I've been trying calorie counting apps for the first time ever, and mainly just to see how they work. And I'm not going to advocate for one or another because I'm still in the middle of testing them. But I like the ones where you can scan the barcode, on whatever you're eating, and it just everything shows up. Those are very nice. Because you know what's in there, and it's easy, and then it can be assembled into data that you can look at over time, and so that's really interesting.
Actually, I upset my son. I took him shopping a couple of months ago, and he really wanted chocolates. I said, sure, I'll buy you any chocolate bar in the shop where the first ingredient is actually cocoa. Cacao. And poor guy, he went through, I don't know how many hundreds of bars, but what it's done is it's actually teaching the kids at that young age to start to look at the ingredients and understand.
So I've got a what seems like an odd question, but I wonder about this because I often use the example of in the United States in the grocery stores, it's actually a really good rule of thumb to shop around the outside of the store, right? Because that's where all the fruits and vegetables are, eggs, dairy, to the extent that you believe dairy is good or bad. Meats are going to be on the outside. Nuts, all the good stuff, right? Yeah. And the only aisle I think I really go down often is the coffee aisle. You got to get the coffee, and maybe where the frozen fruits are. So it's a really good rule of thumb.
Coffee's good for you.
But then, it is. But then I always have to say, but I don't know if that's the way grocery stores are laid out in other countries. So since I'm in India, I can ask the expert, would the same rule of thumb apply in India?
I very rarely visit these stores now because we prefer actually to just eat real food. So we just sort of order it from the greengrocer.
That's right. You guys get stuff all delivered here. That's another,
I did go in a grocery store in Saudi recently in Aba, and it looked just the same.
Okay. So maybe that's an international. That would be great because then every time I say that, it'll apply in whatever country I'm in. Okay, so we've got exercise, healthy diet in the big effect size definitely works. Yeah. Sleep, I assume you're going to put up there, good quality sleep. Human relationships, I assume you think are a good thing.
Very much
connectedness.
So.
So outside of those, is there anything else that you would put in that big lever bucket? Definitely works.
Again, based on local experiences, supplements. And I don't mean like a 200 long list, but very specific supplements for very specific deficiencies and conditions. We have huge numbers. I think about 85-90% of our population is deficient in both B vitamins and D. Iron is a big challenge in India, which then translates into low infant birth rates and maternal mortality rates, etc. So there's some very common fixable micronutrients, which,
And I think the key there, you said it, but I just want to re-emphasize is those you can actually detect the deficiency somehow. You can measure it, some biomarker.
And optimize it.
You can supplement to an optimal range and then confirm you've gotten that.
I still think that has a huge impact on aging if you can do that with just basic micronutrients and vitamins.
Okay, so select supplements. Mostly, it sounds like in the vitamin, micronutrient, essential metal sort of space. Anything else you can think of?
I would add hormones.
Yeah, good. That was if you didn't, that's what I was going to put in there too. Yeah.
And I mean, you guys have much more exposure to the Western world, but in India, we're still living in a world where HRT or BHRT is considered something which is, fringe medicine, not mainstream.
Which I found really interesting. That's another thing
had
I
this over
learned
dinner
here.
yesterday,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, so just to amplify what you said, I mean, in the United States, I think with the Women's Health Initiative, hormone replacement therapy for women went down dramatically, and there was this, it almost became dogma that there was this increased risk of cancer and women should not get it except in rare cases. That is, again, I don't know how much it's turned around, but it's definitely, there has been a turnaround there where it's much more widely accepted. Many more women are demanding this now. But it sounds like in India that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. The awareness is, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, the awareness is slowly beginning to build, largely fueled through social media. And also that the population in India, which is now reaching that age threshold, is now reaching a critical mass, right? Median age 27. We're now seeing a larger portion of women on that side. Secondarily, our average age of onset of menopause happens 7 to 8 years earlier than in the Caucasian women set. So,
Any ideas why that is?
No, I'm not sure. I'm sure there's probably some sort of genetic or anthropological reason for that. But lifestyle is probably a big contributor. We have microplastics, we have high obesity rates, we have poor sleep, high stress levels.
Is puberty getting earlier too?
I haven't seen data to suggest that. Something we've been actively trying to find, but haven't seen any data around that. Yeah.
I was just going to say about HRT, because I direct a Center for Reproductive Longevity, that the question in my mind should not be, should a woman do HRT? It should be, are there any reasons a woman should not do HRT? And there are reasons, but for most women, I think that the answer is they should be doing it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think for women, certainly, and I think even for men.
Yeah, what about men, Matt?
Well, for men who hormone replacement therapy is appropriate, for men who hormone replacement therapy is appropriate, I think it can have a big impact, right? So again, thinking about efficacy, likelihood of working, and size of effect, I think in both men and women, hormones I would definitely put in that bucket. Anything else?
I wouldn't just limit it to HRT or testosterone. I would also add thyroid augmenting. We have a lot of, actually anecdotally in clinic, that's the data I have, it's probably about 15 to 20% of people who come to us have subclinical hypothyroid with Hashimoto's as well. And again, our sort of first approach is not just to replace, but actually to fix. There's a lot of sort of gut thyroid axis involvement, so we try to look for some sort of.
That's an undiagnosed thing globally too. I think it's probably not just here. So.
I think we've hit most of the things in that category. So I'll just throw out a few, and we can go around and see where we would each put them. So rapamycin.
I still think it's the most promising drug that's out there.
So in terms of likelihood of working in people. Definitely, maybe, definitely not.
Between definitely and maybe.
Yeah, I'd say 4 or 5, 3.5, 4 or 5. Enough that I'm confident to take it myself, and my parents on it.
We've all taken it.
I would put it solidly in the maybe category, but towards the higher end. And if it does work, probably big effect size.
And we're all just looking at you to give us the data.
I know, right? We'll start with alpha-ketoglutarate.
I'll give it at least a 3 based on
for efficacy or effect size. I mean, likelihood or effect size.
For efficacy, I think effect size is probably. Well, I mean, we're looking at data right now that suggests that it, at least by methylation testing, has the biggest effect of any supplement that people have looked at so far. So maybe it's bigger than that. I don't think it's as promising for effect size as rapamycin, so maybe a 3.
I didn't know anything really about it until we spent time this week together. So
I'd give it a maybe, and then somewhere between small and I would say less than rapamycin, but more than other stuff. Metformin.
Efficacy.
And let's say in non-diabetics, right? So let's say non-metabolically perturbed people, because it's a very different beast there.
Exactly.
We would all agree it's a good drug for some people who have metabolic disease. Yes.
Highly skeptical and minimal effect size.
I would agree. I only use it in diabetics or pre-diabetics.
Okay.
Otherwise,
Sounds like, wow, we're so far in pretty good agreement.
Well, I mean, we reevaluated all the animal data, and there's just no data that is affecting lifespan in animals. And so you're limited to these retrospective studies in humans, which have many potential interpretations. And again,
so when you say animals, you mean mice, though, in particular, or do you look across all organs?
mice, but generally.
Okay, so let's say that again. You did sort of a comprehensive study of prior publications using metformin in mice and for longevity, and the conclusion is
basically the control mice in almost none of the studies meet a high enough standard that you can say anything about the effects of the drug. And even then, if you look at the effects of the drug, they're mostly minimal.
And in the studies where the controls had a reasonable lifespan, metformin had no effect. So I think this is really important to just.
But you're going to have some India audience here for this one, perhaps. Let me just remind everyone, because maybe 30 to 40% of them are on metformin. We're not saying that you should not take your metformin, right? Because
it's a wonder drug. Yes,
exactly.
So again, if you're taking it for diabetes or pre-diabetes or metabolic dysfunction, really good drug. Keep taking it. It works. We're talking about, is it a longevity drug in the sense of, does it slow the biology of aging and increase lifespan? And I think there's a lot of misperception out there that metformin is a longevity drug, and there's just really no good animal data to back that up, which surprises some people. What about SGLT2 inhibitors? Again, we're talking about not for using it for diabetes or for any other indication, kidney disease or whatever, for aging.
There's very little data, but I think it's promising. I'm actually considering trying it.
Yeah, I'd put it in I think there's a pretty good chance. I don't know if I'm quite as bullish as I am for rapamycin, but pretty close.
I wouldn't say that. But.
And pretty reasonable effect size, potentially.
Maybe.
Okay. What about let's just say NAD precursors in general?
Why don't you start?
I would put NAD as...
Do you recommend NAD in your clinic?
We use it, and I think I purposely use that word as opposed to recommend. We use it in specific use cases.
And what's the form of NAD?
So actually, again, in India, we're primarily restricted to NAD. We don't have the precursors as much.
So it's an availability.
It's an availability issue, right? So NAD primarily. Now we have it available as an IV infusion and an oral capsule. The oral capsule is preferred because the side effect profile is lower. The IV infusion, typically what we've seen, people experience a very heavy tightening of the chest, and it's a 4 to 5 hour infusion cycle, which is very long in terms of a time investment. So oral capsules are preferred. And the two specific use cases, one are ultra high performance athletes or weekend warriors who are looking at gaining an edge towards a big endurance type of event. Maybe it's more placebo, but we'll take that as it is. And the second is that in the elderly population, assuming some of the data is true where you have this decline, then can we give them something to maybe correct for the decline and maybe bring them physiologically towards some sort of normalcy?
I've kind of revisited my thoughts on this because I've never been much of a believer in NMN or NR. But recently I'm an advisor for this company. I started advising for this company, IX Biopharma. And their main technologies, they make really good sublingual delivery mechanisms. And so they made NAD plus epigenin, which is a CD38 inhibitor.
Right.
I'm not sure this is even on the market yet, but they have the NAD alone on the market. And you sublingually take it. And I find when I do that, and I think with the AKG, I see clear changes in my endurance performance. I don't know if that's good for longevity, but it's fun to go running and not be breathing so hard.
Right.
Yeah. Actually, I think that's really interesting. The combination of an NAD precursor and a CD38 inhibitor, and I don't think we have much data yet, but it'll be interesting to see. What about spermidine? You guys have any opinions on spermidine?
Generally a believer based on our animal data. We were able to recapitulate what was reported on lifespan and also show metabolic benefits for it.
As a supplement, where would you put it in the likely to work and then size of benefit?
3.
Maybe just not low confidence. I guess we should have a confidence metric in there too, maybe.
Yeah, likely to work, maybe 3 out of 5, and maybe the same effect size as AKG. 2 to 3,
yeah.
something.
Yeah, I guess that'd probably land about there too. Maybe I'd put it a little less likely than AKG to work, but comparable.
But
effects.
work towards what end? What are you?
Well,
sort of
again, I
looking
think we're thinking about this as, targeting the biology of aging to generally maintain or health longer,
Health
not
span.
for a specific
Yeah, yeah.
disease condition or anything like that. Yeah, health span, maybe for lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah. So we have a few brands now in India offering spermidine. We haven't actively sort of looked through the literature to discover whether we want to use it or not.
Are there any?
I haven't tried taking that, but one comment I would make is if you're trying these things, pay attention to your body.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Because
Exactly.
you can notice changes that happen.
Having said that, placebo effect is real, and that's okay if you get a benefit from it, even if it's not the drug.
But when I'm running and my heart rate and my respiratory rate are uncoupled, that's not a placebo effect.
Right.
I think when somebody says, I just generally feel better, that's also worth paying attention to, but that is more prone to placebo.
Absolutely. Is there any supplements we haven't mentioned that you use routinely?
We use ashwagandha here. Obviously Ayurvedic heritage, but specifically for people who have got very resistant sleep patterns that aren't allowing them to then get enough of that quote of deep sleep. So after the magnesium, we sort of couple it with ashwagandha. I use it myself as well periodically.
And specifically in people where you're trying to improve sleep. So you don't just
not generalized, specifically for sleep.
Okay.
And it has the sort of anxiolytic or anti-stress related, which would be coupled with sleep activity as well. So ashwagandha is one. The other thing we use actually a lot in clinic is curcumin. We call it haldi here, turmeric. It's anti-inflammatory potential.
Do you see that in biomarkers in people?
Yeah, we do. So actually, we couple it with high dose omega-3. So we put them on 2000 mg or 2 grams or 3 grams of omega-3.
Interesting.
With the curcumin as well. And we're therefore able to see not just an improvement in the HDLs and reduction in sort of ApoB, LDL, but then also the inflammatory response coming down, which is ultimately what it wants.
So you said 2 to 3 grams of omega-3.
Yes.
That's daily.
Yes.
And then how much?
Curcumin is 400 to 500 milligrams of curcumin.
And also in our conversation, you mentioned berberine too.
Yeah, of course, and berberine.
And that's more for people who maybe don't want to take metformin or they want to try a non-pharmaceutical version of metformin. Again, we chatted a little bit about this, but I think we're both of the opinion that berberine probably acts through the same mechanism as metformin. So it's just it's an over-the-counter version of metformin in many ways, right?
I'm really intrigued by astaxanthin. I'm trying that right now. So I think the data is pretty interesting on that. Not much, but my intuitive buttons are being pushed.
I'd probably kind of put astaxanthin and urolithin maybe in that same
urolithin too.
Same group. Yeah,
same
I've tried it and I didn't notice anything and I stopped taking it, but that obviously doesn't mean anything either.
So what are you noticing on?
I haven't noticed anything. I just started trying astaxanthin, but I think the cardiovascular data is interesting. The mitochondrial data, the idea that it could really be a better antioxidant in the mitochondria is interesting.
Yeah.
So I think that it's an interesting molecule and it's kind of cool because I got like the pure form somebody sent me. So this is this molecule's made by algae, and then salmon and other things eat it, and it's what makes them turn red.
Right.
And so if you get the purified molecule, it's like this deep ruby red powdery stuff. So it's just kind of cool, right? So
where do you guys stand on antioxidants?
It's such a catch-all term, right? I mean, even the term antioxidant is always relative to something else.
Right.
So I think there's a couple things to say, right? One is different antioxidants are going to have different antioxidant capacity, that relative nature, and then they're also going to have different targets that they act on, different tissue distribution. And so, I mean, I think in general, there are obviously conditions where antioxidants can be very beneficial.
Yeah, that I agree with.
But as a rule, just taking antioxidants to slow aging, I think there's no good data to support that. And if anything, it might actually go the other direction.
Although I would add that we pay a lot of attention to protein damage, oxidative damage to proteins or DNA. Yeah. Lipids may be where oxidative damage does the most damage. And most of these things we take are either unknown or don't target lipid oxidation.
But I would also say, for when people are testing molecules and they see an effect in a laboratory animal, right? It's just a very easy sort of term to put on it to explain the effect.
Has anybody called rapamycin an antioxidant? That may be
That's a good question.
That may be the only geroprotector that hasn't been called an antioxidant.
Right.
No, but it's an important point again for our India audience because we are seeing this escalation in sort of IV infusion facilities, right? Often being done at home or in the clinic. And a lot of the cocktails have quote unquote antioxidants. But I think people need to understand that there's not just one antioxidant. They should be asking the doctor who's prescribing, hopefully it's a doctor prescribing, that, which is the specific one and why am I being suggested to take it?
Yeah.
How are oxygen bars doing here? Is that the new thing?
We're drinking oxygen water and hydrogen water and all that stuff, and a lot of carbonated water.
You can go to bars now and just breathe oxygen.
Yeah. I had that.
So where would we put that on our, definitely doesn't work, does work?
Put it in the negative number range for extended lifespan. But I don't know, maybe it feels
but saying
good.
that, I'm genuinely curious, and in fact, we have a protocol running in Mumbai, are using hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Yeah, that I'm interested in.
So where would you put that in the scale?
I would say 3+, so not quite at 4.
So between might and definitely works, you mean?
Yeah, I think we need between might and definitely. No, definitely is very strong. So is there something in between there?
Well, between might and definitely. maybe. Yeah. But maybe with a little higher confidence than some other stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with that with a caveat.
Yeah.
I think that the way these clinics are using these hyperbaric chambers is people come in, they do it once, maybe they do 3 times over the course of 2 months.
Yeah.
I don't think it's helping at that level. You need to be going in on a regular basis.
What's regular? Daily?
Maybe 3 times a week.
3 times a week. Yep. And there's a specific, or at least the science has suggested that there's the rebreathing method, which is hyperbaric with high flow oxygen coming off it, and then going back on.
Yeah, and I've heard
cycles.
you speculate that it's the coming off and the induction of the hypoxic response that's actually driving.
I forget the name of the scientist in Israel that's done all that work.
Shai-Efrati.
Yeah, that's his model, really.
So question though is, do the benefits persist? Because if you have to do this 3 times a week, right? Do you have to do it indefinitely to get any benefit?
Dr. Efrati's work has suggested that there's a 40 cycle minimum, typically done over the course of whatever it is.
And that's a relatively high pressure, right?
That's it, between 2 to 3 atmospheres.
And most of these chambers are not.
They don't even go there.
They don't go there.
And how big do we think the effect is going to be? Because from a pragmatic perspective, I think one question in my mind is, does it actually work? I'm naturally a skeptic, but sure, I'll put it in the maybe category. Don't know. But even if it did, how big are the benefits going to be for most people?
So I sort of think about the different types of benefits. So cognitive benefits in terms of sort of brain oxygenation, etc. Physical benefits for the sort of the weekend warrior trying to get that extra bit of kick charge to propel the.
So how big are we talking though? Again, compare it to regular exercise, not as big.
No. Again, I would put this in sort of the 1 to 3%.
Yeah. So again, I think that's important for people to understand. There are things that work.
Yeah.
There are things that work really well, and there are things that work, and maybe you get an incremental benefit.
Yeah.
Or we think they might work, and maybe you get an incremental benefit.
This way, imagine that model's right, that you're inducing the hypoxic response. So if you did this for a month, all right, imagine you took a drug that induced the hypoxic response for a month. What would be the long-term effects of that? Would that be a transient effect or a long-term effect? Like in rapamycin in mice, that's a long-term effect.
Right.
We don't know.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's just important for people to appreciate. Okay, so we're about at time, but I wanted to ask you, Marcus, because I know we align, I think, pretty well in your clinical program. When you think about the diagnostics that you use, what are the things that you think you prioritize that most doctors in this space should be thinking about, should be using in their clinics?
I think comprehensive blood-based has to be the first approach. It's easy, done at home,
And if you just break that into big categories, what would you put there?
You'd have your CBC, your chem, inflammatory markers, liver, kidney, metabolic markers, hormonal panels, heavy metals, vitamins, micronutrients. So, a nice list of about 100, 120 types of markers in there. I like some of the digital devices because it gives a more real-time lifestyle focus to what we try to do. And it's a behavior shift as well for people.
So you're talking about continuous glucose monitoring?
Yeah, the CGM. I got a CGM on now, a sleep ring, a fitness band, a smart scale. They're not that accurate, but directionality of trend is good. And we can compare that to the DEXA scan and then sort of look at sort of trends. So those sort of devices at home.
Having said, some people do get anxiety from those. So again, you need to know yourself a little bit.
Yeah. And what I always tell everyone is that right now, and I think this is a state of the maturity of where the apps in the market is, which is all of the apps today celebrate the data and the graph as the hero. You open any of the sleep apps and the fitness apps, you're seeing that. That's not the hero. The hero is actually now the inference and what I should be doing today.
Yeah.
Right? So even in our application, which we ask our clients to use, their home screen is just the things that they should be doing today. The data is actually on screen 3, 4, 5, 6, right? It's buried beneath if they want to go there, because it does cause anxiety for
I
some.
also assume they're going to be measuring other really important things like blood pressure, maybe glucose.
Yeah,
sure. So those will make them much more valuable, I think.
Yeah, I
if they're
actually
accurate,
heard about
if
it
they're
this
accurate.
meeting, this continuous blood pressure monitor that's in the UK. Can't get it in the US yet, but that technology is game changer.
Yeah,
right?
I think so too.
Yeah.
So sorry, interrupted, but
No, so after digital, it'll be the imaging stuff, which I think we're very aligned on, which is DEXA, coronary calcium, carotid intima, 2D echo, stress test, abdominal and pelvic ultrasounds.
and do you think a lot of those are necessary for everyone, or for people who are at, say, higher risk of cardiovascular disease, for like the CT?
These are not, none of these are expensive, relatively expensive. None of them are invasive.
Although I think the pricing might be different in India than in the United States. Yeah.
So I'm saying for India, on sort of parity terms in this sort of urban population, these are all affordable, they're non-invasive, and they're quite quick to do.
Yep.
So doing it at a minimum of once a year should not be a burden at all. And for the person who we find a deviation, let's say fatty liver infiltration, which is about 30% of the population, then doing it twice a year allows us to know whether the interventions
iteration is so important.
Exactly.
Yeah, so important.
So that's sort of the base stack, and then you can add microbiome, genomics, full body MRI, all that. But that's sort of later on.
Great. So this has been fantastic. Thanks, guys. I think this has been informative, and hopefully the audience has found it entertaining and informative as well. So really appreciate sitting down to do this. And,
thank you. We'll see you guys in India soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good.
All right. Thanks for watching the Optispan podcast. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please post them below. And we'll hope to see you next time on the podcast.